Hi, everybody. Welcome to the season 1 finale of Made Possible by Pop Culture, the podcast. I'm your host and producer, Danielle Turchiano, and I honestly cannot believe we're at the end of season 1 already. Yes, I'm the one that scheduled it and decided how many episodes were going to be in it, but it absolutely flew by. I'm so thankful to all of you out there who have listened, liked, commented, subscribed, found me on social media. I'm also extremely grateful to all of my guests who basically came on an untested podcast and said, yes, I will share my stories with you, even though I don't know how many people will do all of the things I just mentioned. And now we're at the end of the season. So I do want to point out that there was a theme to the season, and it's obviously okay if you didn't notice it while you were listening, or maybe you only got a chance to listen to one episode and now you'll see what I did when you look back. Basically, I decided to start this podcast almost as a response to just the mass destruction we've seen in the entertainment journalism field. Layoffs, corporate interference, consolidation of roles, just a lot of changes have happened over the last few years. And I basically said, I want to shine a light on these hardworking and talented and passionate and knowledgeable individuals that go into this line of work. They do it for a reason. They do it even knowing it's not super glamorous. It is long hours. It is usually low pay. And all of my guests for the first season were journalists, and most of them focusing on entertainment, specifically television journalists. Now, obviously, if you've listened to the episodes, that's not all they are or all they do, but I brought them on to kind of say, look at all of these great people. There's a reason that they're in this line of work, and we need to respect this line of work more than we currently have been, or more than I feel like specific corporations currently have been. So anyway, we're here at the end of season 1. Now, if you've made it this far, you probably do already know what the podcast is about, but I'm going to say it one more time. It is this podcast where I ask my guests to come on and share their pop culture childhood memories from something that was particularly influential or inspiring to them in their youth. And then we pivot to modern pop culture and we look at what from that world is really exciting, or maybe even just as influential to them today. So in this finale episode, I'm very excited to have on this guest. Probably most of you already know and love her, Maureen Ryan, better known as Mo Ryan, contributing editor at Vanity Fair currently, and the author of Burn It Down, Power, Complicity, and A Call for Change in Hollywood. She previously wrote for the Huffington Post, Chicago Tribune, Variety, The Hollywood Reporter, probably a bunch of other places that I'm leaving out because my memory is bad. But wherever you found her as a writer, you knew she was going to give you something really powerful, something really strong, and a lot of the time, something really coming from love. Yes, she has written this book that is outing terrible behavior and toxicity in Hollywood, but she's also written so many pieces about fandom and about championing shows that are underseen and deserve more attention. Please welcome me in joining Mo Ryan to the podcast.
Hello.
I'm so happy to have you. We need to say, probably for everybody who's listening or watching on YouTube, a lot of people know you for a lot of these groundbreaking, like we're outing toxic men stories, especially because of your book. And I do want to say that's not what we're here to talk about on this podcast. We're going to do some more fun discussion on this podcast, but you have some news about your book. Do you want to share that first?
Yes, I do have a little bit of news about the book. It came out last June 2023. There's going to be a paperback coming out June 4th of 2024. So if you had been hesitating to buy it or get it from your library because you don't like, the other formats, paperback is coming. And by the way, I did take the opportunity of the paperback release to update some things. I think a lot of it will be seamless and you won't even notice really what I've changed. The biggest change is in the chapter in which I talk about, will there be strikes in the industry?
Yeah.
I had to
read. I was reading it during the strike last year.
A lot of people
knew.
One of the nicest, I got compliments or like updates of people like they're reading it on New York City subway platforms. I would get sightings, or people were carrying it around in the picket lines. So that was like, to me, the ultimate win. But I was able to update that chapter specifically about labor and labor action and talk about what actually did happen, not what might happen. So that's probably the place where you'll notice it the most. And again, it's not a wholesale change, but I just basically took the opportunity to kind of make it as timely as possible and more accurate in terms of the strikes.
Honestly, that's good because now it gives me a reason to get the other version because I have the first and I was hoping you would have it like in your background,
I
like
do
a
have it
bookshelf
in
full
there.
of books because I don't when I read books, I don't have physical copies. I buy it for my Kindle. So for
Right.
me to be like, everybody go read it, and you're just looking at my phone screen, it
So
wouldn't make
here's the
sense.
original
There you
recipe.
go. Yes. So
And
there you go. So,
here's the new little baby. New little
oh, I
baby.
love it.
And the
But yeah,
major
I mean,
difference is my picture is smaller. It's a problem. Need
that's
to talk to
okay.
the designer about that.
I was gonna say
Yeah,
that's
I
okay
find
because in the next printing, you can just make it the entire back cover.
just the whole, yeah, just like pump that up a little bit. Yeah, get that going. Yeah, no, I'm really proud of it, and it's
Yeah,
going to be more handy to carry around if you're a person who likes to have physical copies. So
yeah,
my
definitely.
news.
Well, I'm excited, everyone. Well, I'll remind everybody at the end of the episode, we can tell them where to get it specifically. But what I really wanted to have you on this podcast, a big reason was because of late, most of the stories that I read from you are these more like, we have to make changes. We have to like take down these people, which I 100% agree with. But I can also say, it might be a big shift from like the industry, the shows, the movies, whatever that I loved, that you loved growing up, to come from a place of love and fandom to then have to see the flaws and have to be willing to say we have to change. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was like what obviously what we're talking about with everybody is what was a big influence that you enjoyed in your younger years. And I'm asking everyone to set that up themselves because you're the one who's the most passionate about this. You're going to do a better job at setting it up than I would.
Well, when you posed that question to me, it was so tough because there's so much pop culture that I just very formative for me. Books, films, TV. But I wanted to go to Doctor Who because I'm a huge nerd. It's actually not up here, but I have a little canine little statue. You have to have the merch. How can you
Yes.
do that if you don't have the merch? Um, oh wait, here we go. TARDIS pen. Gotta have
Nice.
that, right? Woo, we're just doing special effects. This is what the special effects actually looked like back in the
Well,
day.
I was so yes, we are going to get into that
Yeah,
because
the whole, yeah,
I do want you to set up what you chose, but I will say
right.
that I had never seen it before until you pointed it out. And I
Oops.
knew to go into it with like this was made in the late
Mhm,
70s, it's going to look a
mhm,
certain way,
right.
and I still didn't feel prepared. So,
Yeah, we'll go back to kind of like the formative era of, like I kind of grew up in the 70s and 80s, and there weren't that many networks and channels and like all of the choices that people have now. It was like you had three networks in PBS. And then later, maybe somebody had HBO or had like a bootleg connection to some kind of pay cable thing. But so on Sunday nights, I got into the habit of watching this block of programming on WTTW. And I do wonder how much, modern day nerddom came from just that WTTW, the local PBS station, just from that block, because they had um, like there was a comedian named Dave Allen. He was very funny. There was the two Ronnies. I'm just really pulling out very obscure
yeah.
things. But there was Benny Hill. That they had the Monty Python. I must have heard about it at school, but they had like Monty Python episodes too. So also though they would show each Sunday night in that block a half hour of Doctor Who. So it'd be like most Doctor Who's from back in the day were like a 4 to 6, there was basically an array of episodes that were like one story. And so I checked it out, and it was extremely, made on the cheap. Like no one associated with the franchise will deny any of that. But I think what I responded to was, I love a good quest narrative. I love a good villain. They always had really good villains. Like the
Mhm.
Master was always like this incredibly good, like probably, RADA trained, classically trained actor. They had such access to such talent. And obviously, I mean, I think if I think about Doctor Who as a whole, it's aimed at anyone,
Yeah.
anyone can be sort of into it. But certainly it arose as something that was aimed at kids. So it appealed to that sense of adventure, that sense of fun. Um, I just, they had a lot of really good storytellers and creators and writers, and even though they had like not a lot of money, it was just, it did remind me of a lot of shows I grew up with as a kid.
Mm.
Like, here's a fun adventure, but underlying all of it, not in a heavy-handed way, as far as I could tell, was this idea that you should help people. You should do something good in the world. And I think that that's something that I've always responded to. And actually, it's funny because I swear I'm not just trying to like shift my own merchandise, but
You
like
should, first of all, it's okay if you are.
there was, I guess the parallel I would draw is there's a version of this book, that ends like right here. Do you know what I mean? Like, and then all
Sure.
the suggestions aren't there. What Doctor Who is about is creative problem solving, right? And not with a gun.
Right.
There's that. I'm not saying people don't die in Doctor Who, they for sure do. But it was like, here is a set of, here's some people or aliens, whatever, they're having an issue. How can we help them? And so that really influenced me in so many ways, because it's not enough to just identify a problem. How can you work together to come up with a solution? And obviously there's like, it's weird that for many decades it was just like, hi, a British white man will save everything. I'm like, is that a thing? I don't know. Because there's the show didn't avoid the pitfalls that many other properties have fallen into over the
Right.
years. It's interesting because I recently did a big deep dive on James, not recently, I don't know what time is anymore. I wrote something for Entertainment Weekly on the legacy of James Bond.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I actually sat down and watched all the Bond films. And the first few, you're just like, and well into the 70s and 80s, the stuff on like racial stereotypes, you're just like, I would like to not have seen that, whatever that was. But I mean, sometimes like there's stuff to do with women, obviously, but like,
Mhm.
but at the same time, you can see that franchise kind of understanding and recognizing over time, like we need to move with the times and change. And I think Doctor Who, you know, Russell T Davies said it himself recently in the press he's been doing for the new season of Doctor Who, which he's returned to
Right.
run. He's like, yeah, sometimes it's too slow, sometimes change is too slow, but we needed to change. And I think, honestly, I've made this argument elsewhere. I think Doctor Who is probably one of the best ideas in popular cultural history, because, in part because, as with the cast of Saturday Night Live, as with James Bond, the lead can change, but the concept stays. And so now with everything being rebooted, we're seeing it's much more
Mm.
common. But the idea that this person would go on to have many lives and many relationships with people, and that there would be sadness and mourning around, companions leaving, and also joy and excitement and making new friendships and having new companions and friends and allies. That is just one of the best ideas of all time. It's just a really smart way to keep going. I don't know, for all I know, it was a way to, resist people asking for more money over time.
Oh,
I don't really
because
know.
I was gonna say the arc you pointed out for me to watch to kind
Mm,
of get a sense of where you were coming from with your love of the show was City of Death. And
mhm,
that I ended up Googling a little bit about it as I was watching it, because the character of Ramona was played by a different actor in that one that had previously been played. And I didn't know any of that. And so I think like beyond the doctor having different companions character wise, like I thought
mhm.
what they did was pretty interesting in terms of how they explained this new actor playing this character.
Right,
She
right.
can just regenerate, and she's an alien, so she has this ability. And I know there was rumors around why she wanted to leave at the time that I've now Googled, that I have no idea what's true and what's not. I'm not here to
Right.
spread more rumors, but I found that so interesting because I had always looked at Doctor Who as, yes, the lead can change, and yes, the companions can change with him, but it always felt more in step to me in a way.
Mhm.
That they were always a pair that would change together in the ones that I had been watching. And I know that's not true now of all of them,
Right.
but it
Yeah.
was just I just found it very interesting that they were finding ways to do that back then in different permutations.
And
Again,
they
when
also
they didn't
changed
have a
the
lot of
interior of
money.
the TARDIS, that would change a lot, and that was always so interesting to me too. There was just an inbuilt refreshment, like mechanism, which I always thought was, again, I think it was like just an expediency because not every actor wanted to do this kids show for as many years as whatever. And also, I don't know that I've done a ton of reporting around Doctor Who, but like I've known people who've worked on it, and it's definitely very challenging to make. Like modern day Who, they shoot a lot of it in and around Wales, and it's a very elaborate
Mhm.
production. So it's it's a big commitment for people to have, but I think sometimes they update the interior of the TARDIS in ways that I think are ugly. Sometimes they don't. But I actually have done some features around Doctor Who, and
Yeah.
I've talked to other fans. And the thing is, it's like, okay, well, maybe I'm just going to tap out on this season or this
Mm.
doctor or this certain companion I don't like. You kind of wait it out, so to speak, but you can kind of dive back in, and they've been really good about that, making it so I think in a way they've maybe overcorrected in that sense where like this became this went from being one of many kids shows that the BBC churned out to like a flagship piece of IP for this massive corporation, right?
Yeah.
So I definitely have witnessed, you know, from me watching it in my basement with my sister and brother in the 80s, like
I was
on
going to ask,
a
like,
public TV station,
yep.
to now, I think they way overcorrected in certain points of like they want to sell the merch, which of course I buy, that's fine, like whatever, but like they want it almost, there have been times when it's been way dumbed down in a way that I think does not do the franchise any favor. Like, I don't mind that some episodes are very big and broad and anyone can jump in not knowing anything about it. Like, you watch City of Death, hopefully it wasn't like a terrible experience. Like,
Oh no,
it,
I didn't mean to imply that it was.
yeah,
It was just I did have to brace myself for the like visual effects
right?
portion of
There's
it.
so many times on Doctor Who old school where like someone slams a door and you can see the whole like set
Yes,
shaking.
yes. Or like you can see the top of the set, or when
Right.
Carlos rips his face off, I was like, oh, it's a real Melrose Place moment. Not to call
Yeah,
back to my
there's
previous
one female
podcast.
character where she's dressed in like animal skin mini skirts, and I'm like, we're not, what is
Right.
happening?
Oh
What's
no,
happening?
no. I also meant like in this particular arc when he rips his
Mhm.
face off, the alien that's revealed, speaking of, you aimed at children, I wrote down he looks like he's on Sesame Street. And I don't mean that to offend the person who made it, because I
Right,
know at the time it was
right,
to make,
right. But
you
I
did the
mean,
best you could, but it looked friendly. It looked like fuzzy. It was
like a
green,
Sesame,
like
yeah.
Oscar the Grouch with a big eye. I don't know.
Well, it's a rite of passage in the UK to say, oh, it made you want to hide behind the couch. And
Mm.
like it varies. Like I'm a pretty much a scaredy cat, but like I think, so they brought it back in the 80s. Poor old Paul McGann like did give it the old college try. That movie was not very good. And then they brought it back again in a more sustained way in 2005. And I think it's like it's uneven. Like I'm fully willing to admit that one of my faves is uneven. Like there are stuff from the old school and the new school where I'm like, was this your best idea? I don't know. Sometimes they'll like make it too dumbed down, like a bloated blockbuster that's just not very interesting. For me, the sweet spot of Doctor Who is old school or new school is when I know the doctor is compelling and charismatic and fast on his feet and maybe flawed, maybe kind of a jerk sometimes, but has this kind of energy that you
Mhm.
can understand why literally the universe is it like there are things that just kind of he just throws himself into these paths of adventure. But the companions can be a huge a huge factor for me. I went to a Chicago area Doctor Who convention a few weeks back, and one of the companions was there, and I didn't cry, but I like was very like, and then, but then we got talking and it was like, she was so lovely. And I'm like, I'm just shooting the shit with this really great person, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's like the best part of this is that even though we've been doing this job forever, we can still have these moments where this, we know the actor's not the character, but the character meant so much.
Yes. And don't you find that? I mean, I think I'm glad they're still going to cons, like I'm
Mm,
glad that, we were backstage and I didn't, my husband, who's actually English, prevented me from knocking over poor old Sylvester McCoy. Like he's this older gentleman with a cane, and I was
right.
about to like, was like, that was a very funny moment because like Sylvester McCoy was a huge guy with UK Kids
Mhm.
TV, and my husband was like, you cannot not own this person from my childhood.
Right.
Um, but yeah, it's like there's an emotional
Mhm.
connection that you form, and I think especially with Doctor Who, it's formed over decades. And so you get into a debate with a Who fan, and you could go like this era and that doctor and that writer and this person, and by the way, the UK model of how showrunning works is very different to
Mhm.
ours, which I think has its pluses and minuses. So the I don't typically a UK show does not have a room as such as we think of it. It's more that the top person and their producer like farm out scripts to individuals and then like rewrite and so forth. So it's very much the stamp of that person and what they care about that you'll see over and over again. So with Stephen Moffat, you would get um he loves a puzzle box, a narrative where there's like, a lot of layers and cleverness and dialogue that's very bantery and so forth. Russell, I find his stuff very fun, like in terms of just the character dynamics and the emotional content and the
Mhm.
psychological depth. And also it's what each actor brings to it. I feel like it's still a lot of fun for me. I definitely, I was every time they change doctors and change head writers, you're always nervous of like,
Yeah.
what are they gonna do? But I think Ncuti Gatwa as the doctor, I just think his energy is so refreshing, and I think that that's a big part of the changeover. People get excited about like what will they bring to this
Yeah.
template that's going to be different and new. Um, I don't know. I mean, I dip in and out of it. Like I haven't rewatched every recent season, but I have rewatched a number of my favorite episodes. And Blink. There are so many episodes where I mean, you and I could get into the
Well,
weeds
I was
about.
gonna say because I do want to go back because you talking about actors and how they change things. Like you had said, like Tom Baker. So I want to know what it was, how much of it was like maybe he was the first doctor that you really
I
focused
think
on.
it was really that. I mean, I think
Okay.
you hit it right out of the gate. Yeah, I mean, I think you know it's almost like I don't know. They say with like young wild animals, they'll just impress upon like if a human brings them into their space, then they imprint upon the human. Like I just imprinted upon Tom Baker, um, because also like it's who they maybe because it was a kids show, they would just allow it to be like silly and funny. There's a line he says in City of Death where he says, "I love your butler. He's so violent," and I've never forgotten that line delivery in 40 years. Like how he just he brought this joie de vivre to it. And you didn't really ever know what he was going to do, but you just knew that he was going to be the live wire in each moment. And just charisma for days. There's someone I follow on social media who just posts like I'm rewatching. She'll so just post like she posted a picture of Tom Baker in an awards ceremony with like a beard. I'm like, he's a handsome man, like I don't know. So I think that's the reason, though of course, in the modern era.
Well,
Um
wait, before we get to the modern
yeah,
era, I want
yeah,
to talk about how
yeah.
your love of Tom as the doctor that may be imprinted on you first affects how you even view the new doctors to come.
That's a really good question. I think, it was really lucky that he was my first doctor because I accepted it that every adventure in the universe would find this particular dude. Like he just, you just see him occupy the space, and he's the most interesting person in every room almost. Um, and you see, even if he can be frustrating, why people want to be around him. So everyone has to bring that quality to it, I think. And I think casting for Doctor Who is really hard, because they're all bringing, like Peter Davison is a very different energy.
Yeah.
Christopher Eccleston, again, extremely different energy. So, but I'm not just saying bad, but they have to be compelling. They
Mhm.
have to be charismatic. You have to believe that they're that smart too. They're that creative. They're that willing to do the brave thing or the wild thing, or just dive headfirst into a situation. And, even, but at the same time, be influenced by their companions,
Mhm.
be mindful of who their companions are as people. So I think it's a very hard balance to strike. And although I wonder if in casting, if it's like either somebody has it or they don't. You know what I mean?
I
Like,
do think that has to be a little part of it. Like you can tell
yeah,
sometimes when someone walks in the room, like how magnetic they are, and that
exactly. We've
charm
seen it.
just comes out.
I mean, the thing is, sometimes and it can vary. Like sometimes you meet someone in real life and they're very like reserved, they're very
Mhm.
quiet, and then on a screen, it's like bam, they just have that thing. But in a weird way, now that I think about it, I'm wondering if casting the Doctor in Doctor Who, in a weird way, if it's like they said about casting Shooty as the most recent Doctor. Russell said he wanted to just tell him in the room, like there's no question. Do you
Mhm.
know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
especially for in this, but this is also, what is that head writer or showrunner, whatever you want to call it, what does that person want to do
Right.
with the show at that time? So maybe Russell's talked a lot about wanting to give hope to people, especially young people who are stressed out, especially queer people. Like he's like, people are facing a lot these days, especially
Mhm.
younger folks. So like to have an out actor like Shooty in the role, that's and Russell's out, obviously.
Yeah.
So, he might have had a different list of priorities, in which case the UK, there's a million great actors there. But I think to carry that series on screen and off,
Mhm.
the amount people are willing to commit fully to, spending a year of your life, 10 months of a year in Wales, in the cold and the rain, leading this production. And then I would imagine nowadays off screen, you have to be willing to do all the promotion and all of the press and all of the photo shoots and articles and stuff.
And that's the thing. I mean, obviously, we're talking about City of Death, which the way that those shows were written about at that time, not nearly as extensive as we write about television today, but also because it was more aimed at younger audiences, even less of coverage, right? Now that Doctor Who is such a phenomenon, it's not just like the press for the new season or series, it is also
Right.
and you can choose to ignore this, and I think many people should and do choose to ignore this, but it is also just the awareness of, if I'm stepping into this role and playing this character, I have to deal with all of the reactions that come my way from people on the street, from
Right.
people online, from people in the industry, like whether they're happy with me or not. Some
Right.
people will be thrilled. Some people are probably, I try to stay away from this too, but I'm sure there was backlash from those people who didn't want the Doctor to be anything other than a straight white man.
Yeah, I mean, that's the issue that we're facing in this age of IP, especially, is that, when a property is that old, let's just say, or established, put it that way, because I'm
That is a nicer way of saying it.
yes.
Yes.
Um,
Makes me feel better
there's
about
there's
my
there's
age.
baggage, right? So like, what is the context in which we're viewing the history of that franchise, of that character, whatever it is? And the thing is, it's very wild to me when people are like, oh, superheroes shouldn't be woke or whatever. I'm like, do you understand who created all of the superheroes you love? They were like, they explicitly, there's like this letter from Stan Lee that he put in one of the
Mhm.
magazines of like, this is who they are, and they believe in the little person and helping others and
Right.
helping the powerless. Like, like decades ago, people in comic books were like, no, this is what we're doing, and step up.
Right.
But
But
like,
people are reading into the comic books what they want to read into it, and
right.
they're reading them wrong. Like, or
Well,
they're not getting the messages
they're
that
not getting, I know if
they don't
the
want to
message
see.
that you're getting from Star Wars is that like repressive empires are great, like I feel like you're not.
You're not
I,
doing
I
this
watch
right.
I watch some different movies than you. I
Yeah.
don't know what you're seeing in this, but
But
like
it happens all the time. I mean, not to
the
derail, but like I cover The Boys a lot, and the amount of people who it took until the end of season 3 to go, oh wait, is Homelander the
is
villain? And
Homelander a
I
good
was like, well, I mean, yeah, but also, oh, how are you
right?
like I just
But
didn't.
just to build on that, Breaking Bad, I
Right.
cannot tell you the amount of pushback I got where right near the end of Breaking Bad, I said, I put a piece out and I'm like, folks, Breaking Bad's a great show. We need to really just, I'm going to lay it down for you. Walter White's not a good person. He made a series of active decisions to do morally bankrupt things. Nobody had to. And like literally the amount of pushback I got for months was like,
Yeah.
folks,
Yeah.
no, we're not doing it. Like, but he's a good, he really was doing it for his family. I'm like,
Well, I was just gonna say that exactly. It's because we all do it. I did it with Dexter. Like you justify, you have to love. I feel like you have to love the character to a certain degree to continue watching.
of
Because if
course,
you're not rooting for them, why are you watching, right? But
right,
that's the whole point of the anti-hero trope is that like we're telling you these guys are bad, and you're still going to want to watch them
right.
anyway.
I feel like Vince Gilligan's very explicitly telling you in Breaking Bad that this is not a great person. At the very end, he says it, and I'm like, thank you. Okay,
Mhm.
like this is it's very interesting, this whole idea of like identifying with the protagonist, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? I do, that was the big trap of the anti-hero age, is that if you spend a lot of time with this person, like if the storytelling is skilled, you are building empathy for their position and their point of view. And I think maybe just to bring it back to the doctor, the
Mhm.
great thing about the doctor is that um he faces defeat sometimes, he doesn't win, he doesn't always do, he makes mistakes, and he feels grief. I think that's one of the smarter things they've done in the modern era to kind of make it really appealing to everybody, is not just a kids show, is that it's about um he is a character who's the last of his kind, or like, one, he's very much kind of positioned as alone on the universe. So I think that that can be a really universal thing. But the people who are like, the doctor should always look this way, that the doctor should always be this kind of person, we've had this debate many
Yeah.
times, you and our brethren in the world of like, if like it with Game of Thrones, look, if we're in a world of dragons, anything is
Sure.
possible. Like,
Right. And also, like, I don't agree with he has to look physically like you for you to identify with the character. I
no,
think that
not at all.
I do understand it from the side of if you've never seen a character that looks like you, why that is problematic, because then you struggle sometimes to find yourself
Yeah,
when you're younger. But I do think that as you get older, especially because we've all been trained by different types of media, like, what are the odds that somebody exactly like you exactly was on
right,
screen? No, you
right,
find
right.
ways to identify in other, if you're looking for ways to compare yourself, which I always was when I was watching TV. I was like, I want to see a version of myself reflected in some way. I maybe wasn't going to get it I one to one exactly, but you find like, oh, I'm like this character in this way, and I'm like this character
Right,
in this way. And like, I think more people need to understand, just because we're opening this up and saying this
right.
characters don't have to be straight white characters doesn't mean you won't find something to identify yourself
Exactly.
with,
And
if
I
that's what you
mean,
want.
right. We look to these fictional narratives to, of course, process and think about our lives. And like I said, like the Doctor Who, I'm really a fan of this concept that I call the stealth show. And the stealth show is where we're not going to put it out there front and center. Like, honestly, I feel like a lot of derivative
Mm.
anti-hero dramas or like prestige dramas, they're like, everything's grim and here's a very sad angry man and he's a little, I'm like, oh god, like, what, you're just, this is actually much more superficial than the people making it seem to think.
I mean, I do love The Handmaid's Tale still. So I do love a grim grief
But
drama.
there's layers, you know what I mean? Like, I think sometimes people are just like, you know, we can only make an important drama if nobody ever smiles or makes a joke. And I'm like, have you met human beings? People
Mm.
make jokes. But I really like stealth shows, in that, like, one of my examples is always like how House, the TV show House, was a weekly seminar on ethics, philosophy, and morality, dressed up as a medical procedural. You know, it just, they just didn't put, they didn't advertise that. You know, various shows over time have been like, especially in the first season, we're going to pretend to be this, but then like
Oh
you get
yeah.
into it and it's much they go like in a wild and very, you know,
Because you
creative.
have to get the audience in a
You
way
have to
that's
get the audience.
palatable. And also, honestly, the
Yes,
networks. I mean,
right, you have to get the
could you
network.
imagine if Person of Interest or even Fringe
Right.
started where they ended? Like nobody would have bought that show. Nobody would have watched those shows.
Exactly. There's so many shows where the final season, it's like, oh, this is what you wanted to do the whole time.
Yeah.
I respect it, you know. Um, but you know, Doctor Who always had this subtext, often joyfully, sometimes scare in a scary way, sometimes in a like thrilling narrative or whatever it was. When people come together to at least attempt to do the right thing, you know, it's worth it. It's worth it to try, you know, it's worth it to try. And sometimes the try is, and this is a big thing Star Trek does, because I also love Star Trek. You know, if we're just going to get all my nerd references
Well, I
out.
did a whole hour a couple of episodes ago with Scott Hoover on Star Trek. So
All
maybe
right.
next time I'll just bring you two together and you guys
Yes,
can
yes.
just argue about the best and worst parts.
Right. Well, Star Trek premise of it is, um, it's sort of like, to me, the height of like a political sociological examination. You
Mhm.
know, we're going to roll up on this planet and try to figure out what's going on and maybe help them, but they organize their society or the community in this way, or the planet
Mhm.
works that way. It's, you know, and sometimes the narrative is very silly, because it's like, why are you telling them what to do? Like, you're just kind of like rolling up and you're going to leave in 20 minutes. Like, that seems a little maybe arrogant, but no, Star Trek at its best is, these people live in a way or conduct themselves in a way that I'm not familiar with. Is there a way that I can help
Mm.
them or understand them? And, you know, like, if, you know, getting into the true nerdistry of it all, the Borg, you know, eventually Picard, you know, spoilers, becomes a Borg, and then like that becomes a whole thing. I think that that sort of humanistic view, that's maybe that's what I'm getting at with the influences of my youth, because I
Mhm.
grew up with Norman Lear shows and
Yeah.
classic era Star Trek and um, Doctor Who. And it was always like, quite often you would come across characters or even societies or groups where the lead characters of the show are entry point for you know, the world.
Right.
They're like, I don't understand. Like Archie Bunker was like, I don't like these people, or you know what I mean? Like, there were always conflicts based on people are not the same.
Right.
And this is the thing that I think people like, when they're like, it's too diverse, it's too the, no, but the root of drama, the root of storytelling is, person A wants this and person B wants that, and they don't agree. Like that, and then
Exactly.
what happens, you know, like,
And that's also life. I
it's
mean, like
life.
that is how it works. And I think what you said is so interesting, of just because you grew up with all of these shows that had that at the heart of them, but they also ultimately, or the ones at least you're mentioning and that you gravitated towards, they ultimately had this message of we want to be better. Right.
Yes,
So, and like
right.
the normal your sitcoms, especially, I didn't feel that I grew up with a lot of shows that had that messaging. I felt like I grew up a lot of shows, not that they weren't necessarily on, they just weren't what I was watching. And I think that's also why I come at so much stuff with more of a cynicism, because I got so many lessons from television, but I did get the very specific lessons of like, I watched this family show and it did not look anything like my family show. Right.
Right.
But like they solved all their problems in 22 minutes. And then I turn my TV off and my parents are still screaming. And I'm like, well, life sucks. Life
Right,
is not a
exactly.
sitcom, you know?
I totally, no, I hear you. I mean, that was, So there can be pop culture that makes you just feel like I'm doing it wrong. However, I'm living
Mm.
life like this is a trope that drove me. It still drives me crazy when I see it. But whenever you see like the family sitting down to a cooked breakfast on a weekday,
Yes.
and this is always the thing that makes it's like, oh, there's the bacon and there's the eggs and there's the toast on the plate. And like what always makes me kind of like lose my mind the most is like, oh, here's a pitcher of fresh juice. And it's not just, you know, from the store, that pitcher, like that the actual gallon of no,
They
it's
poured
its
it and it's, yeah.
own poured container. And I'm like, who lives like this? Who like sometimes the fantasy of it all is just so insane. Like I grew up with
Yeah.
those soap operas where it was like,
Oh yeah. Well, I was gonna say I grew up with soap operas
do
too, which
people
I
go to bed wearing
automatically
full
knew
face
they
of
weren't
makeup?
real.
It's like that, like people wake up out of bed looking like completely made up. It's very silly. Um, no, I get it. But it's like what you said, it's you find what you're looking for in the things you respond to. So
Yeah.
sometimes an escape can be nice.
Yes. But I do feel like because you grew up with that type of show, message, etc., it seems like it influences the stuff because having worked with you at Variety, knowing what you wanted to write about there in terms of championing like underrepresented shows or underseen shows, to you're still doing that obviously, but I just mean like there it felt like that carried through. Like it wasn't
Yeah,
something that you just had internalized and acknowledged and moved on from, right?
yeah,
Whether it was conscious or not, I feel like a lot of the shows carry similar themes. I mean,
yeah,
you wanted to talk about Extraordinary from Hulu in terms of like your modern quote unquote influence. And I feel like that one fits in a lot of these ways because
mm,
they're not all outsiders, but the way that they respond, I consider Jen an outsider. I'll say that right up front because she's the one without powers. So I feel like it's a little bit different in the structure, but I do feel like it has that theme of like, well, we're going to rally around you and help you figure this out. And we love you and
yes,
support you, even though you're not like us, that sort of same vibe.
yeah. I completely, yeah, like the outsider narrative it's very powerful. Like I would compare Extraordinary to a show from a few years back that I think I'm not sure if you were a fan, but like Sweet Vicious.
Yeah.
Very much a superhero narrative, but what if the origin story was like, um, people who assault others often just nothing happens, and I
Mhm.
think that,
Sure.
you know,
I think we all know based on
and
reading your
Kim
book.
Robinson was so smart to realize that that's a great origin story. And, like that's a very smart way to play with the superhero trope. And that's definitely how I felt about Extraordinary. That was a case of other writers and critics putting it on my radar. And I,
Hmm.
I really, truly, you're so right. For a long time, I've really had this very, very core mission. And I feel like in a weird way, I just published something recently about like Line of Duty and other like kind of cult shows that I love. I've always had this mission of like, oh, wow, I really want to because I really want to put the word out about this. Like before I came into covering television, I wrote about film, and I for a long time I was actually a music critic.
Mhm.
So a lot of my whole DNA has been like, have you heard of this? It's so good. Let me tell you why you might like it. And if you don't like it, if you try it, you're like, it's not for me. That's fine. I mean, my own brother, certain shows would be like, you have to watch. You're like, oh, it wasn't for me, and I'm like, but you
Yeah.
you tried it, right?
Oh,
Um,
'cause I was like,
yeah,
everyone's taste is different, but if he
yeah.
trusted you enough to try it, that says a lot.
Well, one of the core things that I've also always thought, whether I was covering music or film or TV, was okay, so we have these hierarchies, but
Hmm.
why?
Hmm.
Why does this show automatically get the attention, or this film automatically get the marketing budget, or that? Like, I've always been very deeply willing to question the hierarchy.
Yeah.
And I think it's a little bit of that comes from the fact that I did love TV, I did love nerd stuff, but I worked for the Chicago Tribune for a lot of years, so there's a hierarchy there. A ballet performance is more important.
Mm.
Architecture review is more important. Like we would have to fight so hard to
Yeah.
get like the okay, The Sopranos, the series finale of The Sopranos should be on the front page. And the people would be like, what? But it's not. Ooh. It's like, there's just a lot of my quest as a critic and as a human being has been, I am not here to denigrate architecture, but why are we saying that this piece about a new building in the loop of Chicago is more important than the series finale or a big, huge episode of The Sopranos or whatever? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like these are both cultural products that come from
Right.
different contexts, and I think that they're both important, you know?
And
But
I don't even think you can compare them because they're such different art forms.
but the thing is, there's this received hierarchy.
Yeah.
And my whole thing is, I'm not going to just take the tenets of that hierarchy of taste as a given. I want to dig into it. And like, and here's the thing. Let's say that you and I, someone puts us in a room and says, all right, in the next 20 minutes, take art forms, you know, like dance, music, list them in order of importance. You will come up with one list and I'll come up.
Yeah.
And of course, as we know, it's not a context. Lots of things can be important. But even if you look at, you know, publications now, it's like TV was always kind of the bunt of the litter, you know, and I think I had to fight that for so long. But even within TV, it's, and this is one of my big things I harped on for years. Why is Jane the Virgin
Mm.
not taken as seriously as Breaking Bad? Because it's about a woman, a Latina woman who is part of this matriarchal world, and the color palette. Just think about the color palette of Jane the
Right.
Virgin.
It was very, but I will also argue because of where it aired.
Of course, where it.
It's all of it.
But why are we saying that like his crazy ex-girlfriend?
Same
I
thing.
think that was as
That's
ambitious.
actually, I was gonna say, I would use that as an example because it
Right,
was supposed to be on Showtime and Showtime was like, nah, we're gonna pass. I was like, why?
right, right. I certainly, if you were to take them as a whole, you know, Dexter, the first few seasons were good. Maybe we disagree about the later ones, but like as a whole piece, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is absolutely one of the most important shows of the last 15 years. Like it's,
Yeah.
but you're right. And so the thing that, you know, you probably had to overhear me at like TCA gatherings where I would talk about the show Spartacus. Now, Spartacus, I understand if it's not for you. It's
Okay.
very stylized, it has a very specific kind of
Yeah.
dialogue, it has a very specific kind of gonzo aesthetic, which I enjoy. But it also had, this is the stealth show thing I was talking about before. It had one of the most astute political critiques that I've ever seen, but they wrapped it up in orgies and slicing people's heads off. And that was so smart because the medicine goes down much more.
I know, but so here's the interesting thing. I agree that it's smart for the audience that needs the medicine to go down smoother. I'm
Right.
the opposite. It takes me, you really have to convince me to watch something that is, I'm going to say otherworldly in air quotes, in the sense of like Spartacus isn't otherworldly in the way that Doctor
Well,
Who is,
sure.
but
No,
it
but
is
it's
a
very much a
bigger,
very
like,
specific aesthetic.
yeah, like I
Yeah.
would have rather had the political stuff served to me straight up.
No, that's
And
totally
I
fair.
don't know why. I don't know why, but like
One of
that's,
the reasons I like it is because it's a specific choice that was
oh
made.
yeah.
Very, like, I don't think you could get it made now. It's like they
Mm.
really went for it with certain things. And one of my prime things, which I'm guessing you would agree with, there have to be different kinds of, there has to be an array. You know, there
Oh
has to
yeah.
be an array of tones, like the stealthiness. Sometimes I like things just simply straight up, like, you know, Doctor Who is, obviously it has subtext, but it's also about like, what if we just, you know, save this planet full of, you know, mushroom people or whatever, you know, like it's like, it doesn't always have to be subtext.
True.
But so just to bring it back to Extraordinary, it's, I find that show so refreshing because, as you said, that the absolute like overtext or like the main point that they reemphasize is that Jen feels left out, left behind, because she's living in a world in which most people were, you know, some power manifested.
Mhm.
She doesn't have one, so there's very much the obvious thematic thing, but they explore that really intelligently and really,
Mhm.
I think, emotionally smart ways. But as you say, there's also these layers of subtext. And one of the things I like a lot is like some of her friends, like, um, they want the superhero tropes to be true, but life isn't like that. You know what
Right.
I mean? So there's a lot there. Um, I picked Extraordinary to talk about a current show because it does tap into my, why aren't we paying more attention to this
I thought
little,
maybe.
you
Yeah.
know, this show over here? I want to spread the love always. I want to spread the love because especially as TV went from like, now there's 50 shows, now there's 700, it
Yeah.
was harder for shows to kind of get that attention. So it was really fun for me to write a little bit about Extraordinary. But I think it's also because it has just so many layers about
Mhm.
what does it take for someone to accept themselves and believe in themselves. Because the very funny, I don't know if you'd call it subtext or not, but the very funny thing about Extraordinary is a lot of people's powers aren't that interesting,
Yeah.
or it doesn't make their lives great.
No, I was gonna say, I mean, sorry, I will not call him Jizz Lord Rob. He like that is my night, like that's a nightmare power. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
What is
yeah,
that?
it's very weird. Like it's like it's very funny to me, and the cast is so good, and the woman who plays Jen,
Mm.
Marie Tyers, I think is her name. Doesn't she, like, she does and she doesn't see around her all these people with powers who are not made significantly happier or
Yeah.
more contented by having them. I'm like, Jen, are you like,
But
ugh.
I mean, it just goes, I think it just speaks to that like innate, I'm gonna say innate, even though I don't know that I believe it is innate for everybody, but there's so many people just want to belong more
Yeah.
than they want
Or
other
they want
things,
some
even
kind of
even
partner.
want
Yeah,
the things that are better for them, I would say.
right.
So I mean, I don't know that I would argue that her not having a power is good for her, because I do really like what they did in season 2 where they kind of tied it to her grief. And I was like,
Yeah,
oh, if she doesn't have her
that's
power
smart.
because of her grief, then she definitely needs to like find a way to deal with that and get that power, even if the power is going to be terrible.
Right. No, I think you're right. It was why I think it was really, really smart how they excavated all of that. And also very funny. I like the analogy of like her mind was like this very big, like overcrowded bookshop with books, like
Mhm.
all these little books of like everything she's ever thought about. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think what's so universal about that show is that it's very, very relatable to like essentially like you want to press a button and like yourself. You want to
Mm.
press a button and have life be easier. And, it's very relatable the fact that she doesn't feel like she's quite enough, that something's wrong with her. I think a lot of people go through life thinking, well, if I could just fix this one thing,
Yeah.
then it'd be easier. And so we relate to her. I don't know, I relate to her so much, but also I related to her friends as well. Her friend who, let her kind of Jen kind of dominate her too much and was bad at standing up for herself. And I don't know, it was very within this very comedic, enjoyable context. It was just such a well done exploration of, and I also think, there's a lot of shows like the dialogue around the TV show Girls, like having lived through that era, like I'm surprised brains still even partly function because sometimes that whole discourse got so poisoned and everything. But I think Extraordinary does a really smart job too of examining what it's like, just being kind of an aimless young person, whether it's,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm no longer in my 20s, believe it or not.
Oh, neither am I. But you
I'm
can still have those
32.
feelings. I don't want to say completely aimless, but I mean, I think you can still have those
Right.
like, I'm having them. Like, what should I do next with my life? So,
Yes. Yes, I totally I relate to that. Like I wrote a book last year and it's like, oh, okay, well, I gotta do other stuff now, I
and
guess. Thought about
I was the jerk that was like, when are you writing a novel? Is that
it. I've thought about like honestly, like I've part of my this whole year for me is like, what is my identity now? And obviously I'm still doing stuff for Vanity Fair and for other publications too, and having fun with that. And I do have an idea for another book. But it's like I don't, for the first time in a long time, I don't really have a deadline. as such. Like I should do a proposal for my next book, and I keep telling my book agent, like, I'm gonna get you a proposal at a sometime. And she's like, that sounds very definitive. Thanks. Great.
Right.
Um,
I mean, I'm sure she can give you a fake deadline if you need one to work towards.
yeah, it's very interesting because, you know, you and I, when we worked together at Variety, you know, we were just chatting a little bit before the recording. It's like, and even before Variety at HuffPost and other publications, like I look back at the workloads I had at certain
Mm.
places, a lot of which, you know, a fair amount of it was self-imposed, like, oh, I want to do this Twin Peaks cover story. And oh shoot, I have 4 reviews due that week. And like, you know, it's like you just, sometimes it's a kid in a candy store
Yeah.
thing. Um,
But then that becomes expected, and then that's your new normal. And then you look back on it and go, how did I do that? Why did I do that?
and then I managed to triple all of that with like writing a book. And because it was my first book, and this is nobody's fault, I did not give myself enough time. Because the thing is, like in book world, it's like, we'll sign a contract this year and then it will come out in 2 years. I'm like, 2 years? That's forever. I have forever to do a book. And they're like, really, you don't? And then like the deadlines did. I'm like, oh gosh.
Right.
Time last year, it was like, oh, wow, oh, this is not enough time.
Right.
Um,
I mean, because look how fast it went from your book coming out in hardcover to now it's out in paperback. Like it was a year, but look how fast that year went.
it went by quickly. And the funniest part of the whole book journey was, you know, I began putting together the idea. The proposal went out 3 years ago.
Wow.
And so then, you know, we end up putting a deal together with Mariner and all that. And then it's like, well, people want a book about discontent within the industry and possible labor action in the summer of 2023.
Even if they hadn't gone on strike, I think the timing would have been good because there was so much conversation, or at least I was hearing so much conversation around like, what's happening with that? Like we had a lot of movement for a while, and then there are some other people we couldn't move on, and they're still working. And then like, is anyone making things better for so that the people coming up aren't going to become these
Right.
people that then have to be taken down years later? So I mean, I
Right.
don't think there's ever going to be a time when it's not important. Like I said earlier in this conversation, like I am cynical. I would love to believe that we'll get to a place where none of this behavior exists, but I don't think we will. I think that Earth is going to explode well before that happens.
Oh no. But I mean, you know, I do think it was important to note this too. Like part of the balancing act of writing the book was some things have gotten better,
Yeah.
but other things have gotten worse.
Yeah.
You know, as someone who knows the industry, like the biggest issue the last few years, it's like, yeah, the Me Too stuff and the misconduct, all of that needs to be covered, all of that needs to be changed culturally and just even legally. Like there's a lot of stuff the industry is not good at.
Mhm.
But the biggest issue that I realized kind of while I was writing the book is like a lot of people who made the shows that you and I watched coming
Mhm.
up, they are not able to pay their bills. Like this
Right.
is like the whole new model, the brave new world we were all promised. And by the way, 4 years ago, I wrote something for Vanity Fair about TV seasons and TV runs are getting too short.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the things, just to bring it back to like, I want Extraordinary to get another season because I think we left it at such an interesting place with Jen's journey
Yes.
that, oh, I need more. But now we're at the point where like, will shows only ever get 16 episodes ever? You
Right.
know, that doesn't seem great. Um, what the big overall trend in what made the long run of Doctor Who possible, what made the industry as we know it and the middle class of the industry as we know it possible was, and obviously the UK is different, Europe's different, but
Mhm.
like people who make the thing, you know, the seamstress, the camera operator, the writer, the actor, they should meaningfully share in
Yes.
with their tiny, tiny slivers, share in the prosperity of what's being made. And I really do think that we're seeing now this unionization efforts in many spheres growing.
Mhm.
Hollywood was way ahead of the curve there. So we can sit here and talk all day about things that were terrible in Hollywood and
Mhm.
worse than like civilian society, right?
Right.
But one of the things that the union did was 100 years ago, the studios were like, hey, what if you just joined our union that we
Yeah.
made for you? And they're like, yeah, no, that's not a thing. We're not doing that. Um, what emerged in basically like the 40s, 50s, and 60s into this, and what made the TV that I loved in the
Mhm.
70s, 80s, and 90s and beyond possible was if you made a show and it ran for 100 episodes or even 50
Yeah.
episodes, you know, most people I know through the industry, working actors, working craft people in the crafts, people directing, writing, whatever, they were maybe what I call LA comfortable. That was like the
Mm.
impact. I
Mhm.
personally, the subset of people who are rich for life and never have to work again, it's less than 1% of the
Right.
industry. Most people are trying to just be, middle class in cities that are very expensive
Right.
usually. So, and that's because they meaningfully shared in the vast profits that were being made.
Mhm.
And so as I was writing the book, I was like, I don't think that that's an unreasonable ask,
No, not at all.
but seasons are short,
Mhm.
runs are short.
Mhm.
I just did this list of, as you said, like one of my big things is like undersung shows. So I wrote
Yeah.
about Rita by Tanya Saracho.
Yeah.
I wish there was more of that. Men of a certain age. I wish there was more of it. There's extraordinary. I hope that there's more of it, but just the precarity in the industry has gotten wildly,
Yeah.
people, actors are doing podcasts now. People are doing Cameo, and I don't. It's always been a hustle. Like people have to hustle to
Right.
pay the bills. But I
I
do
mean,
think,
when I look at that, I mean, I think that brings up a good point is like years ago, even maybe 2 years ago, a lot of actors would have said Cameo is beneath me.
right,
Only reality stars do
wow,
Cameo. And
right,
now it's like, well, you know what? There's money to be made. I want to keep my fans happy. I'm not getting the work I used to get because all the orders are shorter and we're all fighting for the same jobs.
yeah.
Why aren't we doing things like this?
Every actor who
Oh,
does conventions, who does Cameo, who does podcasts, who does, like I don't creative people in general. They're having we probably both can name 10 people we know who are
mm,
also working on comic books, novels,
mm. Yeah, you have to kind of diversify yourself. And I mean, I
right.
would argue your skills too, because, to go to a convention, to do a cameo, you're kind of able to kind of still be you and reach your
Right.
fans that love you for the roles and things like that. But I mean, if you can stretch your creativity and do, audio podcasts that are scripted and narrative, even audiobooks and stuff, or if they're starting to write more, I'm like, I feel like that's going to become the necessary piece of this. I don't
Yes.
think that we can just say anyone is one thing anymore. The same way we were
No.
talking off camera about, when we're journalists and suddenly we're doing three jobs because they've let people go or whatever. And it's just like, well, that's normal now. Everyone has just accepted it and we've
Right.
all moved on. And it's like, well, is that healthy? Is that smart? Is that good for the business? I don't think so, but here we are.
It's really true. And the thing is that I feel like the outcome of the strike, two things, honestly, one thing should have ended it and one thing did end it.
Mm,
There were graphics going around, everything we just talked about. Someone had a graphic out there of like the top 7 or 8 people at like the studios and the top talent agencies. If you divided it, each of the individuals in this graphic were making like 100 million in one calendar year.
mm,
David Zaslav has made $1 billion
mm,
over the last decade to basically strip mine things for
right.
parts and make cheap reality TV the norm.
Hmm.
And so the thing about it is, the people in this industry, creative people aren't dumb, they're not stupid. It's like, oh, well, gosh, we're only paying our executives $1 a year. That's not happening. They're all making minimum, the people at the top of these organizations are making at the low end 20 to 30 million a year.
Hmm.
At the high end, over 100 million a year. So the thing is, they're watching their incomes be hollowed out or go
Yep.
down. And they're like, the brave new world of streaming was going to be, your show can be as long as it wants to be.
Mhm.
Fleabag should have been 12 episodes. God bless. That was perfect. I
Right.
wouldn't want it to be longer. But what that became was, that model was enforced on everybody. And I'm sorry, but you cannot live in LA based on working on 6 episodes of TV every 2.5 years. That's
Right.
not a realistic expectation. And at the same time, the executive pay, or the top tier of people, their pay is going up by leaps and bounds. So that graphic should have ended the strike
Mhm.
before it even began. But then, for, having done a lot of misconduct reporting, you know, I had to write the stuff about the potentials of I did think people are really, really, really ready to strike. They don't want to strike. They're
Right.
very they were at their end of their rope 2 years ago. So I think the reality of a strike is very possible. It all depended on how unhinged the heads of the
Hmm.
studio would be. And I say that advisedly, the heads, because I think
Right.
the executives in the trenches don't want to treat talent like and writers terribly. I mean, maybe they get off on that, but I think
I mean, I think a lot of them, because they do work closely, they see their value. I think this all goes back to like who's
their jobs
valuing
are
what.
precarious too. And by the way, low
Yeah.
level and even mid level executives oftentimes are not making bank and are
Oh,
working
no.
90 hours a week. So I'm just saying, the very top cadre of executives, for them, and we worked at trades, for that comment to come out like, we're going to wait for them to become homeless, that doesn't happen by accident. That's not quoting them out of
I
context.
mean, I could do a whole podcast about the coverage of the strike, which I won't do because I don't want to burn all my bridges. But yes.
Well, but I think what's happened though, and look, people like to clown the trades. I think there was good coverage at the trades. There was less there was good and bad coverages all over the map, like of
Absolutely.
the strike. But I will say, I think the public has been educated about how the entertainment they love is made. I think
Mhm.
what I've called the great demystification has occurred. And the great demystification is, not every, like, the actor you see on a red carpet could be struggling to pay rent, and often is struggling to pay rent. I've been inside the homes of people who were number one on a call sheet, and they are not fancy houses. Johnny Galecki's house was really nice, I will
Well,
say
but
that.
he's been on how many?
He was on,
But I mean,
like,
you got to put it in
right, the thing is,
perspective.
it wasn't even that big. It was up in the Hollywood Hills, and it was just
Oh,
like a really beautiful spot.
sure. But I mean, like he had Roseanne,
God bless.
he had those National
Right.
Lampoon movies, he had Big Bang Theory. Like
But
he is
but
a different caliber of number
right.
one on a call
and
sheet.
and I have no issue with how nice certain people's houses are.
No, not at
But
all.
most
Turned
people who work day to day in the industry are not living large. So to sit there and say, to show that level of contempt, to have one of your flunkies say to, an outlet, we are just going to wait for them to be even more broke and be unable to feed their families, to be homeless.
Hmm.
That the level, that's what weirdly enough, I feel like that level of contempt is kind of coming through in a lot of different aspects of society. It's like, people don't, like, people, can we all just treat each other like human beings? And maybe maybe I'm overreaching, but just tying it back into like that
Yeah.
humane, humanistic worldview that I grew up with. It's like, weirdly enough, I was just having this debate. I don't consider myself a Catholic anymore.
Hmm.
I'm Buddhist and I meditate a lot. But like,
Mhm.
what I did get from the nuns that taught me, or like the best aspects of the Catholic Church that I was raised with, was the do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Okay.
And I feel like, look, every era of human history has had atrocities and terrible behavior and greedy behavior. But did I think that the studios, when I was sitting down to write the sections in my book, and like right on the edge of the deadline, like, would I, I've covered the industry a very long time. I did not think that they would show that much
Hmm.
open contempt, if only because they are shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah.
The day that that story came out, where the comment was made about making people homeless or waiting till people are homeless, that galvanized the
Yeah.
strike. like nothing, because I've covered, I think we were both maybe a variety. There's been other near strikes and
Oh,
other.
yeah. I was say I was not
So
there when there was an actual strike.
where was I at? I was at Huffington Post when there was the 2007,
Mhm.
2008 WGA strike. And honestly, there was more wavering than within the guild,
Mhm.
because what Hollywood's, that top tier has always been good at divide and conquer, and they tried to run that playbook again. But from the most established creator showrunners to the lowest level assistants, when that story came out, they were like, are you kidding me? And as many people pointed out, this is the industry that trained people to not get paid for a year.
Yes.
They can wait you out. You don't have movies, you don't have TV shows unless they put the words on the paper. So it's very strange to me. I don't know what the future holds. I
Mhm.
do think we're in this very strange era of transition, but I talk a lot to like young like writer groups and like
Mhm.
people coming up off the record or on Zooms or just chats or podcasts or whatever. And I don't I I fear for them. Do you know what I mean?
Do
Like
you
I
tell them to do a different anything else, different industry, different job, something else?
I I mean, well, I think it really touches on what you said, which is be prepared to be diversified and how you
Oh,
approach
sure.
making money, and look out for yourself and look out for your community and build a community. That's why I put in my book, maybe, I don't know, this tying it back to Doctor Who. Doctor Who has companions. Doctor Who
Yeah.
typically, some of the best episodes are like he gets a bunch of races together, a bunch of groups together to like fight, the bad people, and like, oh look, the fleet came and it's all these different ships from all over the galaxy. You have to have a community that will help you figure out if you can survive in the industry, and pick you up when you're down, and pass on job tips and connections and so forth. I do think that mentality of having each other's backs seems to me in people coming up more of a kind of a pervasive thing. Of course there's always going to be people who are like, well, it has to be dog eat dog. I'm like, the interesting thing about having covered the industry for so long, having been around it so long, I first met Vince Gilligan 30 years ago, around that. I
Mhm.
don't know what time is anymore. I don't know. I'm doing it time. My own brain is timey-wimeying me. Um, he was the junior writer on the X-Files.
Mhm.
And he's the same guy. I mean,
Yeah.
he's never had to be like, there's been a number of people where I've watched their career, and Ken Levine, a writer director, he worked on MASH, he worked on
Mhm.
Frasier. I would go out for lunch with him when I was in LA, and he'd be like, fame and money bring out what people always wanted to be. He's like, that doesn't change them. It brings out what they wanted to be and who they wanted to be. And I was always like,
I would add power to that too,
power, of
because I
course.
definitely know some people who don't have a ton of money and aren't famous, but have a little bit of power.
Those are
And
the most dangerous ones.
kick
Why
the
is
door closed behind them on the, you know what I mean? And so what
that?
you were
Right?
talking about, like, I do think it is slightly generational and like who you're coming up
Mhm.
under. It gets talked about a lot how Gen Z, if people make the jokes of like they feel entitled. And so they won't take certain things. And I'm like, I don't see that as a bad thing, because the
Oh,
things that they feel they won't accept are the things we shouldn't have been accepting this whole time. But we were told that's just how it is, fall in line, and you want to work or you don't want to work.
that you have just absolutely encapsulated so much of what I wrote about in that book.
Yeah, not that, I mean, you wrote it
No,
better,
well,
but
no, but I mean, here's the thing. I wish I'd put this somewhere, but I'll say it now. I've learned a lot from younger generations about having realistic boundaries
yeah.
around workloads, around pay, around treatment, around respect. I think especially in the entertainment industries and creative
Mhm.
industries, this whole millennials don't want to work or the young people don't want to work. No, they are advocating for themselves in a way you were taught not to advocate for yourself. And it makes you feel weird. But no, that like so many people coming up are looking around and going, if I don't advocate for myself and if I don't have the back of my peers, we're the only ones that are going to look out for us, because the
Right.
people at the top are going to talk a good game about X or Y or Z and then not actually follow through. Talking of cynicism, like they have every reason to be cynical about the motives of the people with the most power.
Yeah.
I don't grudge them that at all. I think a lot of times in Hollywood, when you hear they don't want to work, they just can't cut it, they can't make it, they don't have what it takes. A lot of times what that is someone unwilling to put up with disrespect, basic disregard of their humanity, basic disregard of their bodily and physical and psychological needs, vindictive
Yeah.
night behavior, manipulation, and just the sheer hours. The whole like you have to be on call 24/7.
Right.
There are a lot of young people teaching the rich old people in the industry that's not a thing anymore. God bless. That's all I can say about that, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think it also comes from like, I am a millennial, but I know people who have kicked down doors that let me get to where I got. They also got to a point where like, well, we've done what we can. And now
Yeah.
the rest of it is for the next generation to fix.
Yes.
And so like you can't then complain when they're trying to fix it. I don't,
I'm
that's the
gonna
part too that I'm like, why are we getting mad when we're trying to just continue the progress?
But there are so many people in the industry, I think, who are from insecurity, from envy, from resentment, whatever it is. Like there are so many underminers.
Mhm.
The person whose name I'm about to drop is not like that, but there's a young um, writer coming up called Joseph Mwamba, and
Mhm.
I don't know if you saw him online, but he what I don't I think he's pre WGA, so I don't
Okay.
think he's
And
anybody with hair.
I've seen
Yeah,
the name, but I don't,
he's very much like there. He was among many people from the pre WGA or sort of like coming up through the ranks from
yeah.
that population who organized snacks for the pickets, picketed themselves,
Yeah.
did all these things. And it broke my heart one day when I saw a social media post from Joe where he was like, people are just saying, "Oh, I'm just doing this for networking. I'm just doing this to
Mm.
get my work, get opportunities or whatever." I'm like, people, I just saw so many people, including Joe, be altruistic
Mm.
and give back.
Yeah.
Honestly, giving back to an industry that just even financially for a lot of them hasn't given them very much.
Right.
Like, there's always going to be naysayers in this industry. There's
Yeah.
always going to be people who try to make you feel small. And I've certainly tried to say to Joe, look, I'm really there, there's a number of people who, and I'm singling him out, but I mean Joel Garfinkel, who
Mm.
organized Green Envelope Grocery Aid, like all these systems of mutual support. I'm not discounting that many people are still struggling financially and
Right.
psychologically. That's for real a thing that's still going on. But I think another demystification, the flip side of like, I live out here in the Midwest, people don't think it's all just everyone's on a red carpet and on a yacht and drinking champagne all the time. Like you demystify that this is a job. These are jobs, and that people deserve to be treated with respect. But I hope that what I think I've tried to do, and a lot of other people have tried to do, is, and I think social media has helped with this, demystify or basically take down a few pegs this idea that the only people who are in Hollywood are just out for themselves and purely
Right.
selfish. That's another myth. It's not like that. Because again, I've had the chance to see people who were like a junior staff writer, 15 years ago, and now they have their own show. And they're guess what? They're not treating people like dogs.
Right.
You
It
know,
can be done.
it can be done. And this whole idea in every realm. And if it's people younger than me are not willing to put up with the following formulation.
Mm.
Well, it was like me for this, I had to go through XYZ, so you should have, well, if XYZ was terrible, let's not do that anymore.
Right.
No.
Right. Exactly. It's like it's not a rite of passage. It's a thing
No.
you've acknowledged that you should fix.
And a lot of things, especially in creative industries,
Mhm.
Yeah, so that thing that you're telling me is a requirement for this job, that's abuse.
Mm. Yeah, I mean,
Telling people
that is true.
24/7 and reading them the riot act and denigrating them and paying them nothing, that's not giving you a thick skin, that's
Mm.
abuse, and we're not doing that. How about we don't do that? Because you know what? I don't think you need to do that to make a pretty good movie.
Right. I mean, we've seen that there's definitely a lot of stuff that's come out of rooms and, sets that were, or we believe we're not like that. I am very reluctant to say 100% we're not because I
Right?
wasn't there. I
Right?
wasn't there. And you know what? Somebody could come out of the woodwork and be like, This was my experience." And
Well,
I'm
certain
okay, it
movies, I'm like,
was.
please don't tell me that
Oh, no, no, no.
you
I'm
know
the
when
opposite. I
somebody's
love ruining people for people. Every time would get an intern, it was not even intentional. It was just like, they would say like, "I love blah," and it would just come out of my mouth and I'd watch their face fall. And I was just like,
See,
sorry,
but I'm like that with
but also
tropes.
you need to know, you know what I mean?
I've
Like,
trained my
okay,
husband now. He's like, "Oh God, are they going to kill this gay woman to advance the white man's
oh, well, that
sexual
too.
journey?"
You need
Like
to
he
be
knows it.
prepared.
Like I ruined tropes for him. He's like, "Now you're making me see all this stuff." I'm like,
Yeah,
"You're
but
welcome."
then you can emotionally prepare yourself when you see it coming. I think that's a service. I think that's good.
Oh,
I
I
mean, I'm not
know.
good that they're doing it. Good
No,
that
it's not
you teach.
right.
Yeah, you're teaching
You
people how
can
to
at
see
least
it.
be mentally prepared. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Well, I am not going to leave you with the assignment of coming back and telling us what your next book is because I don't want to stress you out. But I've loved having you on today, and I do hope that when your next book is ready, you'll come back.
I
Uh,
want to. Please.
but before everybody signs off, I do want to give my usual spiel. This is the final episode for the season. We will be back for season 2. And as of now, I'm not sponsored by any of these streaming services that I'm about to list. I am purely going to tell you where to watch the things that we talked about today, because I think that you should, because obviously they've sparked conversation and passion. Primarily, we were talking about classic Doctor Who and the City of Death series. I'm going to call it series. It still hurts my brain to call it series, but that can be found on BritBox. And then Extraordinary can be found on Hulu. But then there are a few other things that Mo sprinkled in that I want to call out as well. Sweet Vicious, not available to stream, is available to purchase. Places like iTunes, Amazon, I believe. House is on Hulu and Peacock. Star Trek is on Paramount Plus. Breaking Bad, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, and Jane the Virgin, all on Netflix, and Spartacus is on Stars. So a lot of homework to get you through until season 2. Obviously, please come back, like, comment, subscribe, etc. And Mo, thank you so much. Where's the preferred place that people buy Burn It Down?
Anywhere. Anywhere. If anyone wants to purchase my book, you have my heart, you have my sword, you have my axe. I like Bookshop because you can press a button and help indie bookstores. If you care to buy it there, that would be great. You can find links in my link tree, moryan.com. You can find lots of different places to find me and more info on the book there. And all my social media is on my link tree, which is on my moryan.com site. So yeah, um, I gotta say, anyone buying my book anywhere or just even taking the time to read it, getting it from the library or borrowing it from a friend, I'm so grateful. Thank you.
I think summer reading, put it on your list. I don't know if anyone else does that or if that's just me, but definitely put it on your list. June 4th out in paperback, but out in hardcover right now. So you don't have to wait. Anyway, we will see everybody soon.